Greetings, you Bible-loving people. We want to offer a clear and exceptional explanation of the book of Revelation by Burton Barber. Since all was recorded in the 1970s, this will be audio, and we have added nature scenes to help. All can be purchased in permanent form on 4 discs for $35 postage paid. Check the options below, and may the Lord bless this exciting learning time ahead for you.
Last evening we spoke through chapter 6 and chapter 7. We're taking the liberty for just a very few minutes to go back to the latter part of chapter 6. Now he's describing in the opening of the 6th seal the convulsion of heaven and earth, or the total collapse of the government in the western part of the Roman Empire. That was during Constantine's day. And this is described much like a man would see the collapse of the earth. The heavens rolled as a scroll. And we deliberately emphasized, beginning in verse 12, the word as. The sun became black as sackcloth of hair. The moon became as blood. Verse 13. The stars fell as untimely figs. Verse 14. Heavens departed as a scroll. Verse 15. The as is dropped. There's a reason why. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains. Before we proceed further in this, you may wish to turn back to Luke chapter 23, verse 27 beginning. Jesus is carrying his cross. Commenced carrying his cross, and is walking up Golgotha Hill, and there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. You know, Jesus was always the master of every circumstance. And here he's about to be crucified, nailed to a cross. And I think you and I would be unfit and undone. Not Jesus. He said in John 10, no man takes my life from me. I lay it down, I take it again. He's always in perfect control. He's like we would like to be when we get all shook up and frustrated and out of control. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Now it's interesting to find in history that what is stated in verses 15 and 16 actually took place. Now I'll tell you why. Last evening we reminded you that in Philippians, and quoted twice in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, you that are troubled rest with us. The Lord assured them, when you are persecuted, you be at rest, for vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I'll take care of matters in due season. You won't need to worry. And the Christians reminded for 3 centuries the people that had slaughtered them, that's all right. You may kill us. In due season, God will take vengeance on you. History records this. that when the hordes moved in, as we'll soon see tonight, to bring an end to the Western Empire, these barbarian, brutal men that slaughtered without mercy the Roman leaders, the free men and the slaves, the leaders and the soldiers, ran to the mountains and cried for the rocks to fall upon them and kill them before the hordes had a chance at them. And that's what Jesus said. And it came to pass. Now, this is not the end of the world, as I mentioned last night. We have a song about that. That cried for the rocks and the mountains to fall on them. But as we emphasize toward the close of our remarks last evening, the book of Revelation marches on through chapter 7 and 8 to 9 and 10 through chapter 22. It's not the end of time. So we merged into chapter 7. And there we have two groups of people. The 12 tribes, 12,000 of each, 144,000, the Jews, sealed. We have an innumerable number of Gentiles, nations and kindred, myriads without number. These represent, of course, the two groups. The gospel extended first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. That's what the prophecy said. That's the way it was fulfilled. The gospel to be preached, Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. In Jerusalem and Judea, the realm of the Jew, the half-breed Samaria, though they had the Jewish religion, number 2, to the uttermost parts of the earth. So we have Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, gospel among those who were Jewish. And then starting in chapter 10 of Acts, to the uttermost parts of the world. That's what he's telling us in chapter 7. And with verse 10 to the end, he shows how they gave glory to God for being so kind to them. Because what he did in the interlude was suspend these winds, which you'll notice in chapter 7, verse 1. And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. So they're standing ready to turn loose of the winds for destruction. 4 winds, but not yet. Because he is giving the saints an opportunity to expand, to grow, to mature. The church, for the most part, had been slaughtered for 200 years. Now it is recovering itself, becoming strong against what lies ahead. And they give thanks. Now we find in chapter 8 that these winds are loosed. And we'll do well, I think, if we can keep our figures square. And when he had opened the 7th seal, which is at this point, and in the 7th seal will be the sounding of 7 trumpets, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Now heretofore, heaven had spoken. Heaven would have an angel to say something, but now there is silence, and John knew there would be an awesome thing happen. Now you keep in mind Daniel chapter 2, verses 34 and 35, and again repeated in verses 44 and 45, the vision that Nebuchadnezzar saw of the little stone cut out of the mountain without hands that came down and struck the Roman Empire and ground it to powder and scattered it over the face of the earth. Verses 44 and 45 give us the same thing when Daniel interpreted this for the king. Now there will be an awesome thing happen because this great Roman Empire will fall tonight. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which is before the throne. The saints are praying about these times. And Jesus said, don't pray for me. Don't you weep for me. Weep for yourselves. Weep for your children. Troublous times lie ahead. You stop to think that millions upon millions of Christians were killed in these 300 years. And especially 200 of them. Then later on, under Roman Catholicism, at least 70 million people were killed. Troublous times were lying ahead. And they were praying. The angel is taking the prayers of the saints and presenting them before God and his throne. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. You recall that in the 5th seal, these martyred saints under the altar cried out and said, how long will it be, O Lord, until you take vengeance? He said, a little season. More were killed under Diocletian. And time was suspended in the interlude to strengthen the church. And now the time has come. The day has arrived. As they said when I was a boy, there's always a catching day. And most of us, at least in the older generation, got caught. We didn't get by too easily or too many times. Verse 6, and the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. We want to make this simple tonight, as simple as we possibly can, and yet move along. So we'll read the verses and comment upon them. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the 3rd part of the earth was burned up, and the 3rd part of trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Now tomorrow evening I'll be giving you a quotation from Gibbon, but I'll tell you what it says. He tells us, atheist though he was, that the 3rd 3 parts of the earth were simply these. They have the Arabians or the Saracens and the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. Now he refers to the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire as 2 separate empires, and they were at this point in history. Because Constantine had moved in something like 323, the capital, or 24, it moved in 24, to a place that then became Constantinople. But they couldn't rule the West. So they became 2 separate empires, and there were 3, and these 3 are going to fall. But 1/3 of those will cause the fall of the 2/3. And we'll see it. So he sees a 3rd part. And notice, 3rd part of the earth was burned up, 3rd part of trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. On this map, which you can see, there were some people called the Huns that came from yonder land, out of obscurity. They swept across between 400 and 410 and made their way toward Rome. You can see their path. They did a little wandering, came down to the city of Rome. Not quite. They were bought off. And they returned whence they came. Alaric, leader of these, descended on Italy that had never seen an enemy in 800 years. A strong empire. After a long siege, I say a long siege, it was, I think, 14 nights and days, some traitors inside at night opened the gates to let the people in. Then 3 days the city was sacked. Gibbon calls this the Gothic conflagration. So the Goths enter on the scene. We have the Huns, we have the Goths. Two of these important. The first, according to this, is 410. You have traced these at this point. The Huns moved in first. The Vandals came third. He calls this the bloody conflagration. Burning of trees and herbage marked their path. Now, what had been a land of virtual Eden, green and beautiful, became burned, completely scorched. He tells us the burning of villages and towns. That's not all. Their fruit trees and the grass and the crops of the field. These were barbarians. So the Goths were the destructive ones. We'll find that the Huns received the plunder, but the Goths were the destroyers. So what God has said is coming to pass. There's an actual destruction. Now I want you to take a look sometime at chapter 31 of volume 3, Gibbon's work on the rise, the decline, and the fall of the empire. We talked about the rise, its height in the first seal, and the decline in the next 3 seals. But the empire, though weakened and corrupted, did not fall. Tonight we're talking about the fall. Verse 8. And a second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. So again, the third part. This is the West. Just 1/3, not the Saracens, not the Eastern Empire, the Western Empire. The third part. This time the Vandals are moving in, and the Vandals are not just hesitating like the Huns did at first. They're moving in, but a little deeper than the Goths did. The Goths surrounded the city, and they plundered, they sacked it, they burned it, but they left. The Vandals bypassed, and we have the word vandalism from their practice. Coming down through what was known as Gaul and Spain, crossed at this point into northern Africa. And they settled here. And from this point, you'll notice arrows in all directions. Now, in approximately 10 years, the year 423, these Vandals, having come from the northern area, rushed over this territory we've mentioned, because their aim was to circumscribe and attack Rome from the south and from the sea. You notice how simple that is? Notice what it says. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the ships were destroyed. That actually happened. I don't know about how many fish died, whether that's symbolism or not, but this is on the sea. And not only that, the ships were destroyed. We have an excellent quotation by Gibbons. Up to this time, the Roman Empire was called the strength of the sea. And they were, but not always. This 600 years, we are told in history, the Romans had been the master of the sea, but as soon as the Vandals had stabilized themselves, within a short span of 20 years, they built a navy that was strong enough to compete with the Romans. So what they did was to land upon the islands and to burn the cities and the villages and destroy everything in the path. 20 years they did this. At the end, you'll notice 455, this date and arrow, says that they came to the city of Rome, and they did. They besieged it. History tells us for 14 days. They burned it. What had been left behind by the Goths, they took advantage of. We're ready now for verse 10. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, which means bitter. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Just a little look at the arrows. You'll see that they didn't get actually to Rome itself, that is these Huns, but they certainly traveled around a lot. They did considerable damage to the entire Western Empire because they killed so many people, probably breaking the back of the army. We're talking about a date of some 440. 440 when they moved into the major arena. There on the banks of the Danube River were some 800,000 Hungarians. Now, they were called Huns, and they're also called Hungarians. Now, you'll recognize these as the base of what later became some of the nations. And I was showing you last evening why God is doing this. In this period of the interlude, He's stabilizing the church, because what God is going to do is completely wipe out corrupt Europe. Europe was sodden and sinful and corrupt, and there was no base for Christianity. And He's going to people Europe with a much better people. So what He did was to move the better part over to the east and wipe out the west. Then in due time, after these hordes came in, and by the Christians were given an alphabet and a language and tutored and taught, and many converted to Christianity, He uses the Saracens to wipe out the east. That's the other third. Now later on, that other third's going to be wiped out. God is in control, just as He was in the Old Testament. He would use one nation to destroy an enemy of God. He'd use another nation to destroy that nation. And a fourth nation to destroy the third nation. That's what He's doing. Can you see it? Let's follow and read. From the depths of Central Asia came these peoples migrating slowly. They overcame the opposition of the Italian army because the Italian army was composed mostly of slaves. They could care little which master they served. Between 150 and 300,000, I mean 150,000, and 300,000 people that were met on the part of the Romans I'm talking about, on the Marne River, by the Huns, these died. And history says that the river ran with blood. I want us to read. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven. Remember him? What did he do? Upon the fountains, upon the rivers. Every battle that they fought was on a river. So just as we saw the Vandals on the sea, now we find the Huns under Attila on the rivers. the next verse calls him wormwood. And many died of the waters because they were made bitter, and they did. 150,000 to 300,000 in one single battle, which was the most significant of the entire campaign. They then turned south, as we indicated, and met the enemy on the banks of the Rhone River. Now, they met upon something like 6 major rivers in all. And descending the Alps, they contended for the very boundary of Italy along the River Po. But left because they were offered rewards. They never entered the city. But they received plunder from what was left in the city. But of a sudden, this man had a rupture. One of his vessels broke. He died of a hemorrhage. They carried him back. I don't know how much more he would have done, but he had served his purpose. And you know what they did? They buried him in the Danube River. They detoured the river, buried deep. Slaves were used for the digging. He was placed in 3 caskets, a gold within a silver one, a silver one within a lead one, and buried deep. And the dirt was placed over it, and the river was brought again over this same old course, and every slave that knew where he was buried was killed. Those were tough days. Now, if you want to get rich, just start crawling underneath the Danube River. The wealth has never been found. Verse 12. And the 4th angel sounded, and the 3rd part of the sun was smitten, and the 3rd part of the moon, and the 3rd part of the stars, so as the 3rd part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a 3rd part of it, and the night likewise. Now here it's upon the seat itself. The city of Rome. Notice this. The Huns came across a threatening people. The Goths swept in and entered the city. The Vandals came down and entered the city. The Huns moved in and robbed the rest. But no one stayed there. No one occupied Rome. They had no defenses. Will there be a man that will stand up and say, I shall occupy the city of Rome? This is unknown by many. An unknown tribe came up, led by a man by the name of Ottumwa. On this map you'll see this. Look at this entire territory of Italy, containing what was known as Ravenna and Lombardy. In fact, you'll find that Lombardy is here. It's the period of the Ostrogoths. Lombardy is here. This is the period we're talking about, which is 476. See the date? And when Ottumwa moved in, leading the tribe known as the Heruli, he stayed there. He established a kingdom. There, my friend, was not a vestige of the old Roman Empire. You see, that little stone cut out of the mountain without hands that struck the image at the feet had destroyed the Western Empire, and its place was Christianity. Those are the 4 winds that were loosed against this empire. And the prayer and the cry of the saints under the 5th seal, how long will it be, O God, was answered. Western Empire came tumbling down. And you know, just like Humpty Dumpty, could never be put together again. It was brought together in a restored form, which we'll notice in 800. You want to keep your eye on that. As the Holy Roman Empire. Structurally it was the same, but of course it was not the same. By the way, while I'm here, lest I get busy tomorrow night, I want to give you the quotation that I mentioned to you by Gibbons. I have a marvelous memory, real fine. It's just this short, so. And I don't want to pass this by. He stated, the classes of men during that interval are conspicuous. The Saracens or Arabians, the Latins or the Franks, we know them, of course, now as Franks here, which is the Western Empire. And he says they're inhabitants of the Western Europe, and the Byzantine Greeks. Of course, that's known as the Byzantine Empire or Byzantium. That's its territory at this point. Those are the three parts. And he saw in the loosing of the four winds, or the sounding of the first four trumpets, the destruction of the third part. We want now to notice chapter 9. We have seen under the first four trumpets the downfall of Western Europe, or the Western time is going to be the Eastern Empire. Chapter 9. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. At this point, we do not know what is meant by a star falling from heaven, except we'll suggest to your mind it's Muhammad. I'll tell you why. What we have done is to establish the beginning point. The 4th chapter, verse 1. The things that shall be hereafter. How soon hereafter? Things that must shortly come to pass. Or, as the Greek says, shortly begin to come to pass, or in quick, sweet sequence. It's a series of events. Shortly? Now, Lord, will you tell us how shortly? He does. The time is at hand. He leaves no stone unturned, for in chapter 1 and verse 1 he said, the things that must happen shortly, or shortly come to pass. And he closes the book in chapter 22, verse 6, and says the same thing. And the last statement, the time is at hand, will be found in chapter 1 and verse 3, and again in chapter 22 and verse 10. Now, if we have the right beginning time, all we have to do is follow the history book, and you'll find things falling in place. Now the Western Empire has fallen. The Eastern Empire is going to fall. But there were only two forces that caused it to fall. You know that? Study your history book. Only two forces that caused the Eastern Empire to fall. Number one, the Saracens, who fathered Mohammedanism. And number two, the Turks, the Turkoman Empire, called by other titles in history. And they also embraced the Mohammedan religion. So thus we are talking about the Mohammedan religion that brought the fall to Eastern Empire, or the eastern segment of the empire. At that time, it represented the total of the empire. Is this Muhammad then? He claimed to be a prophet of God. He said that he descended from heaven. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. That's always intrigued many people to understand what that smoke could possibly mean, and what the locusts could possibly mean. But it's very interesting in history. And I have, I think I have it in one of the volumes with me, pictures of the appearance of these Arabians as they went into battle. They always fought on horses, invariably. as did the Turks. They didn't walk. That's what brought their defeat at the Battle of Tours in 732. Because Charles Martel met them in mountains and hills and among the trees. They'd always fought on the plains. So when they crossed at this point and went into what is known as France now, they could not possibly fight on horses. And they then were turned back. And we'll see that as we move along. The Arabians moved out strongly. And we'll follow the dates to show that from the year of 609, when he declared himself to be a prophet, to 622, when he made his flight called the Haggara, that the Mohammedan religion was spreading, and with it a military fever. And the pictures given of these as they raced across the plains gave a close resemblance of what they called the locusts, which differ from what we call the locusts. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power, which, of course, is to sting in the tail or by the tail. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth. That's in contrast to the barbarians of the first four trumpets. They destroyed. They were vandals. They ruined. They left Europe in shambles. These were given orders, do not destroy. Now you'll find that given by Gibbons, of course. I have a quotation, volume 5, chapter 51, page 286. One of the few that we'll be giving. Destroy no palm trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill and eat. They were told not to kill, not to destroy. I'll tell you why. These that we talked about were there for the plunder. Lay their hands on what they could and leave again. Not so with the Arabians. They intended to conquer, to control. So they wanted to have something to eat. The cattle and the herbage. Furthermore, they were not to do anything to men which have not, that is, they were to kill only the men that have the seal of God in their foreheads, but that qualified itself, which we'll notice a little later. Because the Arabians made a clear distinction between the man that was a phony and the man that was sincere. You see, when you study history, and we'll have that large church history chart up tomorrow night for you, at that point, Roman Catholicism was quickly becoming entrenched. You see, it was Justinian in 533, emperor in the east, that declared the Pope in the west to be the head over all the churches. And not only that, he killed or authorized the killing of everyone who would not cooperate with a bishop in Rome. You know that from history. Now, with this in mind, you can see why the Arabians could easily distinguish between those simple people who had faith in God and those people who are aligned with an organization. We read again. And to them was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. In history, there are no 5 months. No 3, no 6 months that would fit this. Why, you see, from the time that Muhammad declared himself to be a prophet, he was persecuted. In 609, 612, that's an important date. But 622, he had to flee for his life. And so he came from the ancient position or place and fled up to what is known as Baghdad. Now later on, the capital is going to become Baghdad, which it wasn't at that time, but he fled for his life. 1, 2, 3 positions. He fled for his life in 622. It wasn't until 632 that they became militarily active to organize themselves so that they could expand. And thus you'll find the date of their expansion is 632. You want possibly to note that. These, of course, were to make war. They were to torment people like a scorpion torments. They had shapes, verse 7 says, of locusts, like unto horses prepared unto battle. Now the locusts of that day had just exactly what they had, coats of mail or protection upon them in the front, giving the very appearance of the scorpions. And I would just have to presume that God is using this symbol to indicate that. But he does put his finger upon it and say, the horses prepared into battle, on their heads were crowns like gold. Now I'm prepared to give you a little information, and I don't think I need to. You have seen the pictures of the Arabians. As they went into battle, they had a white cloth over their heads streaming down their back. They had something on the top to hold it there. That was called a tire. It was made of gold and jewels. It was bright. It was yellow. If not gold, as in some cases, because they weren't that rich, it appeared as gold. And it was like a tire, or it held this firmly on their head. Like you'll see some men today with long hair, and they'll put something on there to control it. I think if I had hair like that, I'd want something on there to control it too. I have enough trouble with my hairdo. The curls keep dropping out. Let's come down time a little farther. And their faces were as the faces of men. They had beards. Long hair and beards. They weren't clean shaven as the Romans. Look at your pictures. And they had hair as the hair of women. Today, you'd have to qualify that a little bit and say they have hair as hair of men and women. And their teeth was as the teeth of lions. Probably not literally, but they were fierce. And they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron. They were called coats of mail. And the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots and many horses running to battle. That's the way they fought. Now they swept across the country, as you'll notice by the map, in almost every direction. I want you to take note of something that happened downstream. Caliph Harun al-Rashid began at that point in Baghdad overtures of peace. 150 years of warring and battling, and they were fatigued. Now, of course, they had swept on up into the Franks, the land of the Franks, and were soundly defeated, had to retreat again, so their activity was in this particular area. But eventually they said, let's not forever and forever fight. Baghdad was at that point called the City of Peace. And they had now a little more finesse, Mr. Gibbons tells us, and no longer were they the ignorant people that they were to start with. They emphasized education, a little more refinement, and appreciation of other values. So they wanted to enjoy domestic tranquility. Family life. Those were glorious days, starting in 781. Now that's when he made the decree. It was put into action in 782. Now, by starting at the date of their conquest, which was 732, and moving on to 632 to 782, we have how many years? 150. And 5 months. If a day represents a year, which I'd about have to assume it, I know that Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 6 is only an illustration. I have to accept the Bible numbers as Bible numbers exactly, unless I have good reason otherwise. Right? Then I have to look about and say, what does it represent? Now, in the case of Ezekiel, he said that a day was to be a year. Now, when he was to lie down before the Israelites, that period of length of time, God didn't expect him to lie there that many years, but that many days, which would represent the years that the children of Israel would suffer. Here we have 5 months. We have this period of time expanded out, and we turn back again to verse 5. To them it was given that they should not kill, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And we have 150 years time. Now this period of time was their conquest, their torment, their destruction. They gave a choice, and that choice that Muhammad laid upon the people wherever they went was one of 3 things. They embraced the Mohammedan religion, they paid a heavy taxation, or they fell with the sword. Now, early Christians did not suffer. They spared Christians if they deemed them sincere. But the reason that most of the churches and the Christians were killed or they suffered was because they were practicing idolatry. And they drank wine. This was the beginning of the Roman Empire. The Catholic Church. Mohammedans did not believe in idolatry, having any idols, any images. They didn't believe in drinking wine, maybe having wives but not wine. And they killed every Christian that drank wine or had images. But a real fair study of this shows that otherwise they didn't kill them. They simply asked that they submit themselves unto their government, which they did as Christians, like Romans 13 teaches. And there were millions of Christians spared, but there were many of the church people killed. Thus you can see in this what is known as the golden era of the Arabian Nights, a glorious thing happening. From Baghdad forward, the Saracens were sponsors of a great new era. They have taken one bold step toward the fall of the Eastern Empire. For what had one time been the stronghold of the Eastern Empire was no longer. Notice how they've crowded them up into this small territory. Later they were crowded out of this, and the expansion brought them to just a small segment of their power. Now we'll notice that a little later on there will be more static and opposition arising from what's called the Turks. Can't you see how small it is? The Roman Empire had been all of this territory. The West is wiped out. The East has been crowded down to this. And now the Turks are going to appear on the scene. And that will become the end. Let's read again. Verse 10, and they have tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So the emphasis was upon hurt. Torment. subjugation. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath name Apollyon. One woe is past, and behold, there come two more woes hereafter. You see, there were to be three woes in verse 13 of chapter 8. We read it last night. We didn't comment too much upon it, that is, pointed that out. But notice this. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe. This is after the first four trumpets are sounded. The Western Empire is fallen. But there are three more trumpets. Now, after we have seen the first scourge that has brought a limited activity of the Eastern Empire, he tells us that the first of three woes is past. And behold, there are two more woes coming. What we wish to do, we plan to do tomorrow evening, is to give you those two woes. We want to show you that this second woe brings a complete collapse of the Roman Empire. And thus is fulfilled the prophecy of Daniel. Thus is fulfilled the warning of Jesus. Thus is answered the prayer of the martyrs when they asked how long it would be until God took vengeance on those that were killing the saints. Now, do you know what I learned out of this? I learned out of this that Jesus Christ is riding forth, conquering and to conquer. He is the King of kings. I mean the King of earthly kings. That's told to us later in Revelation. He is the Lord of lords. He's the Lord of all human lords. You remember when Jesus was tempted, the third time Satan took him on the high mountain and said, Look at the kingdoms of the world. If you'll bow to me, I'll give these to you. But Jesus was too smart. He knew the scope. He didn't need any handouts and giveaways and welfare state. Get thee behind me, Satan. He didn't say to the devil, You can't give them to me, you don't have them. The truth of it is the devil did have them. He stated 3 times in John. Chapter 13, chapter 14, chapter 16, he called the devil the prince of this world. And he was. In Luke's account, he said, I'll give them to you, for I was given them. Who gave it? Adam and Eve. They were made the sovereigns, Genesis 1, 27 and 28. Come, let us make man in our own image. He made them to be the sovereigns of the Lord, the fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, he said, over every living thing, over the earth. But the devil took it away from them. You know, Jesus was the master. So Jesus went all the way to Calvary. And 1 Corinthians 15 tells us that he was the firstborn from the dead. And that he is to defeat all enemies. We're studying about it tonight. We'll study about it tomorrow night. He's to defeat the enemies. But the last enemy is death. That's a final resurrection. And then in chapter 16, he's declared to be the King of kings and the Lord of lords, because it said, given unto him are all the kingdoms of the earth. That's right. But the devil didn't give those to him. His heavenly Father, God, did. Right? He's marching, conquering, and to conquer. We've chosen to sing a song tonight about this. I think it'd be good to sing all the stanzas, number 212. It's crown him with many crowns. The second stanza says, crown the Lord of love, him Lord of love. The third one, crown him Lord of life. Crown him Lord of heaven. He is King of kings and Lord of lords. Let's stand while we're singing. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heaven eternity. Crown him the Lord of love. Behold his hands and his side, which full yet visible above, in beauty glorified. No angel in the sky can fully bear that aside, but a downward bends his wondering eye at mystery so bright. Crown him the Lord of light, who triumphed for the great, who rose victorious to the strife, for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of heaven, one with the Father known, one with the Spirit through him, from yonder glorious throne, to be endless praise for